Vice President JD Vance absolutely destroys woke CBS Face the Nation host, and it's absolutely glorious. Vice President JD Vance expertly schools far-left Face the Nation host Margaret Brennan with a simple economic lesson when she asks a gotcha question on grocery prices. Vice President JD Vance appeared on Face the Nation for his first TV interview since being sworn into office and shined as one would expect, despite an expectedly hostile Margaret Brennan. As the Gateway pundit readers know, Brennan was part of the CBS drive-by tag team with former partner in crime Norah O'Donnell, who rigged the vice president debate in October against Vance's promise to remain neutral. Despite this, Vance still embarrassed Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Brennan and Vance discussed several issues throughout their interview, including cabinet nominations, immigration, disaster relief, and the J6 pardons. Brennan consistently found herself outmatched by the brilliant JD Vance, as her gotcha questions consistently backfired. One key moment in the interview exposed Brennan's lack of basic economic knowledge as she tried to ambush JD Vance about grocery prices. She first demanded to know which executive order issued by Trump lowers how much Americans will pay at the store. The vice president responded by pointing out Trump's actions on the price of energy and starting to explain how these would, over time, lead to a decline in prices before Brennan rudely interrupted and began engaging in crosstalk. Then Brennan made a mistake, doubling down on her economic ignorance and gotcha questions. Vance made her pay dearly with a fundamental economic lesson.
Yes, Joe Biden did many terrible things to lead to an increase in prices. I agree, Margaret.
No, but all the things you experience at the grocery store are what people touch and feel. That's what you were talking about, bacon on the campaign trail.
Of course, of course.
Those things. When do consumers actually get to touch and feel a difference in their lives?
Well, Margaret, how does bacon get to the grocery store? It comes on trucks that are fueled by diesel fuel. If the diesel's way too expensive, the bacon's going to become more expensive. How do we grow the bacon? Our farmers need energy to produce it. So if we lower energy prices, we are going to see lower prices for consumers, and that is what we're trying to fight for.
Well, of course, these elites that live in their high towers, like this woke CBS Face the Nation reporter, of course, they have no idea what's going on, and they mock the idea of President Trump or JD Vance mentioning the cost of high grocery prices on the campaign trail because they can't relate to us. They just laugh at the everyday struggles of everyday Americans. This is exactly why Donald J. Trump won the presidency. This woke reporter tried to gotcha Vice President JD Vance on the issue of President Trump's historic pardoning of the J6 political hostages, and it does not go well for her.
2 weeks ago, you were on Fox News and you said, if you protested peacefully on January 6th and had Merrick Garland's Department of Justice treat you like a gang member, you should be pardoned. If you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned. Did you counsel the president against these blanket pardons for 1,500 people?
Well, Margaret, I noticed,
including those who committed violence.
Margaret, I noticed that you cut off the thing that I said immediately after that. The full quote is that, of course, there are gray areas. And here's the nature of the gray area. Merrick Garland's Department of Justice denied constitutional protections in the prosecutions. There were double standards in how sentences were applied to the J6 protesters versus other groups. What the president said consistently on the campaign is that he was going to look at a case-by-case basis, and that's exactly what we did. We looked at 1,600 cases, and the thing that came out of it, Margaret, is that there was a massive denial of due process of liberty, and a lot of people were denied their constitutional rights. The president believes that. I believe that, and I think he made the right decision.
Vice President JD Vance is 100% correct. What happened to the J6 political prisoners was a travesty. Number one, it was a rigged, stolen election. The J6ers were attempting to prevent a stolen election, a false certification of an election that was not authentic. Number two, JD Vance correctly points out that there was no due process. Every single one of the J6 political hostages did not receive a fair trial, did not receive an unbiased jury pool selection, judges all biased, prosecutors all biased. They did not get a fair trial in any way, shape, or form. They went overkill. They not only threw the book at them, they threw several books at them. Vice President JD Vance also delivered a stinging message to Catholic bishops whining about the Trump administration greenlighting ICE raids in churches. Last week, the Trump administration rescinded a guideline issued under the Biden regime which barred ICE from conducting enforcement in or near so-called sensitive areas. These areas included schools and churches, which have been known to harbor illegal aliens. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, which receives over $100 million to, quote, resettle illegals every year, responded by complaining that the move will turn places of care, healing, and solace into places of fear and uncertainty for those in need, while endangering the trust between pastors and the people they serve. When Brennan brought up this disgraceful statement by the group, Vice President Vance delivered the brutal message directly to them.
But let me just address this particular issue, Margaret, because as a practicing Catholic, I was actually heartbroken by that statement. And I think that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops needs to actually look in the mirror a little bit and recognize that when they receive over $100 million to help resettle illegal immigrants, are they worried about humanitarian concerns, or are they actually worried about their bottom line? We are going to enforce immigration law. We're going to protect the American people.
Yeah.
Donald Trump promised to do that. And I believe the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, if they're worried about the humanitarian costs of immigration enforcement, let them talk about the children who have been sex trafficked because of the wide open border of Joe Biden.
You personally
let them talk
support them
about
going into
people like
schools
Laken
and
Riley
churches.
who were brutally murdered. I support us doing law enforcement against violent criminals, whether they're illegal immigrants or anybody else, in a way that keeps us safe.
If ICE raids these so-called churches and these so-called safe spaces in order to get rid of criminals that came into this country on their own free will illegally, breaking our laws, well, they're going to end up hiding in these churches. They're going to end up using these churches as a shield. That's exactly what these criminals will do. So honestly, it'll make it easy for ICE to find them, and they all got to go. This is not persecution of Christians. This is not persecution of the church. This is restoring law and order. This woke reporter made a grave mistake attempting to challenge Vice President JD Vance on the subject of the credibility of the vetting of the illegal aliens in this country.
Well, Margaret, I don't agree that all these immigrants or all these refugees have been properly vetted. In fact, we know that there are cases of people who allegedly were properly vetted and then were literally planning terrorist attacks on our country. That happened during the campaign, if you may remember. So clearly not all of these foreign nationals
but there are
have been properly
30,000
vetted.
people in the pipeline, Afghan refugees.
But my primary
Do you stand by
concern
it?
as the vice president, Margaret, is to look after the American people. And now that we know that we have vetting problems with a lot of these refugee programs, we absolutely cannot unleash thousands of unvetted people into our country.
These people
it's
are
not
vetted.
good.
These people are vetted.
Just like the guy who planned a terrorist attack in Oklahoma a few months ago, he was allegedly properly vetted, and many people in the media and the Democratic Party said that he was properly vetted. Clearly he wasn't. I don't want my children to share a neighborhood with people who are not properly vetted, and because I don't want it for my kids, I'm not going to force any other American citizens' kids to do that either.
No, and that was a very particular case. It wasn't clear if he was radicalized when he got here or while he was living here.
I don't really care, Margaret. I don't want that person in my country, and I think most Americans agree with me.
And most Americans do agree. 77 plus million do agree with the vice president. Obviously, this woke reporter has had a comfy little ride the past 4 years with softball interviews with Vice President Kamala Harris. Well, now you got Vice President JD Vance. And on this subject of immigration, he's not messing around.
Well, this is a country founded by immigrants.
Well, this is a country founded by...
country.
This is a very unique country, and it was founded by some immigrants and some settlers. But just because we were founded by immigrants doesn't mean that 240 years later that we have to have the dumbest immigration policy in the world.
Well, this is a country founded by immigrants.
Well, this is a country founded by...
country.
This is a very unique country, and it was founded by some immigrants and some settlers. But just because we were founded by immigrants doesn't mean that 240 years later that we have to have the dumbest immigration policy in the world.
And dumbest is putting it nicely. We've had open borders, replacement migration for the past 4 years absolutely accelerated, and it's led to the deaths of many, many, many innocent Americans. One thing Vice President Mike Pence failed to do was defend President Trump publicly in the news when it counted. Vice President JD Vance, is doing this, and he's doing it greatly.
Both the Wall Street Journal and the National Review, conservative publications, as you know, have been critical of Tulsi Gabbard. The Review called her an atrocious nominee who deserves to be defeated. They compared her defense of Edward Snowden, the fugitive who stole U.S. secrets, to an attorney general who thinks the mob gets a bad rap. Her refusal to accept U.S. intelligence findings that Assad gassed his own people, they said, was like a nominee for OMB director not being able to count. Does any of this give you pause putting her in charge of the U.S. intelligence community? Yes or no?
No, Margaret, look, these are publications that attacked Donald J. Trump obsessively, but those publications don't determine who the president is, the American people do.
Him.
And Donald J. Trump is the person who determines who his cabinet is, not these publications that I think, frankly, have lost relevance. And a lot of people don't like that disruption, but Margaret, that disruption is incredibly necessary. If you think about all of those bipartisan massive votes, we have to ask ourselves, what did they get us? They got us a country where we fought many wars over the last 40 years, but haven't won a war about as long as I've been alive. They've got us a military with a major recruitment crisis, a procurement price crisis that's totally dysfunctional, where we buy airplanes for billions and billions of dollars, terrible cost overruns, the delivery dates are always delayed. So we need a big change. Now, admittedly, there are people who don't like that big change, but it is necessary, and it's explicitly what Donald J. Trump ran on. And I think part of the reason why the American people elected him their 47th president.
This is exactly what we need a vice president to do. Defend the president, especially Donald J. Trump. But also, the disruption is necessary. The disruption starts from the top. Donald Trump himself. The deep state, the elites, and those that believe that they're above us and we're just a bunch of little peasants. That's how they view us. That's how they view the country. That's how they view the world. They don't like the disruption, because that disruption shakes up their entire ecosystem of living and ruling over us. Now, we are not going to tolerate that anymore. President Donald J. Trump is our gateway to disrupt all of that, and his cabinet picks that are disrupting D.C. and the swamp. This is what they've feared for the past 10 years since Donald Trump came down the escalator. And now we are moving to make America great again with the next 4 years of President Donald J. Trump. And Vice President JD Vance is doing exactly what he was elected to do. My name is Drew Hernandez for the Gateway Pundit, and you have been on watch with Drew Hernandez. I'll see you guys on the next one.